Welcome back, everybody. We are back with another episode of Fantasy Football 201. Today's video, we are going to be talking Week 4 start-sit decisions. So this is a video where fans who commented on my videos earlier this week get their questions answered. So if you want to have your question answered for future weeks, comment on my videos that are released every Tuesday, and then you will get your question answered for start-sit going into the following week. So before we get into that real quick, check out my channel if you're interested in a wide variety of fantasy football content. I also make some other content as well involving music, song reactions, song covers, etc. So if you're interested, please consider checking that out. We will get into our start-sit decisions for Week 4 with questions from fans as well as some other scenarios as well based on other sources of sample questions. Format of this is to compare players of who to start and sit based on some questions that people may be having. So we will start with the summary of Thursday Night Football game in terms of the takeaway from that. So the big thing with both teams is that some injuries really changed some of the outlook for some of these players. So I'll start with Jacksonville. DJ Chark broke his ankle and is out for what is probably going to be the whole season at this point. Marvin Jones was also very much a no-show, and the benefactors were Laviska Shenault and James Robinson. Moving forward, I think this will actually be the two players that have a greater role in this offense because Marvin Jones has started out well, but he's relatively capped in terms of his potential because he's a veteran. We already know who he is. Shenault has more of an opportunity to grow, especially along with Trevor Lawrence's timeline. So I suspect that we will see more of Laviska Shenault in this offense. And it is a positive thing for those of you that owned Shenault and held on to him because he looks like he's going to have a greater role, especially with Chark out. And Robinson, also his role is going to increase. He's been very effective as a PPR back over the last 2 weeks, and I suspect that will continue. For Cincinnati, the big news, Joe Mixon's injury. I don't know how serious it is at this time. It's still a little speculative on that, but the rumors is that it's a high ankle sprain, and that can take anywhere from a week to a month. And that changes a lot of stuff for the backfield of Cincinnati because they've almost entirely revolved around using Joe Mixon. The next running back up is Samaje Perine, who is a very mediocre producing back who doesn't really have a lot of upside. Chris Evans is another one to keep an eye on, though. He's more of a change of pace third down back that I think could get more involved. But I think realistically what will happen, too, is that they'll probably utilize more slot players or short yardage guys like CJ Uzomah, who had a very impressive game. He's been a relatively inconsistent tight end, but without Mixon, they may rely more on some of the short game in order to advance the chains. You can see guys like Tyler Boyd, CJ Uzomah potentially benefit from it. Two quick topics I want to discuss, which are, to me, the biggest areas of focus going into Week 4 is, first of all, what to do with Mike Williams. I have seen a wide variety of Mike Williams questions of how to approach his fantasy value. He is an ideal sell-high player because he's been inconsistent in his earlier years in the NFL, and now that he's off to a great start, people can try to flip him for value, which I think is good. You want to try to get guys ideally with Mike Williams like along the lines of a Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins or DK Metcalf or elite receivers that have generally started off slow. But I think the danger is that you don't want to take the interpretation of trading away Mike Williams for anything because there are some situations where I don't know if it benefits you to have Mike Williams. So, for example, I've seen Mike Williams for A.J. Brown. I don't know if that is necessarily an upgrade given A.J. Brown's injury history. Unless you are in a position where you're owning multiple Chargers or you have a great receiving core otherwise and you're willing to wait on Brown, that's a relatively even heel type trade to me that may not necessarily benefit you, especially given health. I've also seen some ideas along the lines of Allen Robinson for Mike Williams, and I don't really know if that's a better situation either because the Bears, we really still have to figure out what's going on with their offense. So that's why my advice has generally been to not buy any Bears players because we don't know if, based on what we've seen so far with multiple quarterbacks, the offense has been ineffective. And what you don't want to do is buy into something like that too early. You are running the risk that maybe you're losing out on an opportunity to buy low if they do boom. But at the same time, I think there's, based on what I've seen of this offense and how they operated in week 3 in Fields' first game when he doesn't have any tape on him, it's not a good sign moving forward. So just my point is that Mike Williams is a solid player to own as a flex. He's in a highly efficient offense. He's one of 3 guys that they primarily go to between him, Ekeler, and Keenan Allen. So he's going to have opportunity. There's guys that I like more, like, for example, a Calvin Ridley, because Calvin Ridley is going to get more of the overall target share in his offense. And other guys of example are Metcalf, because Seattle primarily revolves around 2 receivers, him and Lockett. Maybe Gerald Everett can get involved as well, but more explosive offense with more opportunity. But Mike Williams is not bad to hold on to, too. If you can't flip and get that elite value, I think you are in a good position to still hold him. So just be careful you're not trading away without getting a good return. And then handcuffs. I'm going to talk this very briefly. My intent over the next week, hopefully, is to create a handcuff video where I rank running backs and the value of handcuffing them. But as we've seen already, multiple running backs have had injury issues so far. We've got Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, now Joe Mixon, and it becomes imperative that you own the handcuff to those players. Otherwise, you end up in a situation like this week where Chuba Hubbard is getting almost all the nods to start over multiple flex tier players because of the upside that he had, and he's a guy that was largely unrostered by a lot of people heading into this or into week 3. So just keep that in mind. I do highly recommend that you handcuff one of your elite running backs, though. If they're going to mostly be not of much value to you holding them on your bench in terms of you're not going to be able to put them in immediately that week to play, but it does give you a ton of value as insurance, because the last thing you want to have happen is have one of these elite running backs go down and then you have nothing to replace them with. The handcuff gives you an opportunity to fill that. So I'll talk about this in more detail later. Now we'll go to the fan questions of those who commented. Thank you for your support to the channel, for those of you who did. I try to comment and help out as many fans as possible that comment. I do apologize if I don't get to you right away. I try to get to you as fast as I can. But thank you for those of you that have shown support and asked questions. So we will start with NHBuckets. His question is regarding who to start among these players on his roster. He has Devontae Adams. He has Mike Williams. He has Chris Godwin. He has A.J. Brown, Allen Robinson, Mike Evans, and Amari Cooper as his receivers. Running backs, he has Dalvin Cook, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, and Chuba Hubbard. So I'll start with your running backs. If Cook plays, you're playing him. He does have a 1 p.m. game, which is a little nice because then you kind of can tell early rather than waiting on some of these other players. I think that your number 2, personally, is Jonathan Taylor. I think Jonathan Taylor has a good week coming up against Miami. I know he struggled, but I do like them to rush the ball and try to get some synchronization going there. If you think about it, Miami just gave up a monster game to Peyton Barber last week, so Jonathan Taylor, if Peyton Barber could do it, we'd like to think Jonathan Taylor has a chance to try to take advantage of that. Then you go Hubbard, and I would almost consider starting Hubbard in your flex, because I think Hubbard will have very safe value. He's going to get some receptions. He's going to have some opportunity in the rushing game as well. So, but Hubbard I rank third, and then Saquon, I am a little worried about him this week going up against New Orleans, which is a tough defense, especially against the run. For your wide receivers, Devontae Adams, you're playing. I think the next one that I would rank in terms of playing this one next is Mike Williams, because he's shown the consistency over guys like Mike Evans and Amari Cooper, who are generally very inconsistent. Of those players that are next, I think it depends on if you're ahead for that against your opponent or if you're projected to lose. If you're projected to lose, if I were you, I would go with Amari Cooper. He's got the highest upside of that group. Also has a relatively favorable matchup against Carolina. But if you want to play it safe, I would go Chris Godwin. I think that is your safe floor among those players. in general, Allen Robinson I would still leave out of lineups because we got to see if the Bears can even put together a semblance of offense before we trust them in lineups just yet. Next question comes from Andrew Nicholson. Thank you for your support as well. Couple start-sit decisions here. So his quarterbacks are Tom Brady and Joe Burrow. Already sat Burrow, I believe, so Brady's going to be your starter. I would do that personally too. I think Brady better game, especially against going up against his old team. Running backs, I believe you played Mixon, James Conner, and Chuba Hubbard are your other options. I would go Chuba Hubbard there. Conner, I think, is very matchup dependent in terms of if he will produce on that value for you. Hubbard, I think, is more going to have more well-rounded opportunity. Connor's not really much of a PPR type player. Hubbard is kind of more somebody that I see getting more of the looks every down as opposed to Connor splitting it with Chase Edmonds. Wide receivers, so DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Hunter Renfrow, AJ Green, or Christian Kirk. So I would basically, what I would do is play the number one that I like of that group is DJ Moore. A lot of targets going up against Dallas. That's going to be a very high-scoring game. I like him there. The next that I like is very close. I mean, basically, I think all of these three players are good plays, but I would probably say my number two would be Mike Williams because of the performance that he has put up so far. He gets a decent matchup against the Vegas Raiders this week. And then Terry McLaurin, who's also a startable player, too, in my opinion, because he's got a great matchup against Atlanta. All three of those you want to use as your wide receiver 1, 2, and flex. And Sutton, I would downgrade a little bit because he's playing the Ravens. And, yeah, that's the way I would do that. And then, as I mentioned to him, and for those of you who haven't heard this as well in my kicker strategy video, he has currently Daniel Carlson and Matt Gay rostered. My recommendation is that you drop Matt Gay. In his particular case, he's going to need some more running back depth, especially with Joe Mixon's injury. And by freeing up the kicker, you give yourself an extra roster spot. It really switching between two kickers is something that you can do between waivers, in my opinion. I personally, with my kickers, I don't roster a kicker during the week. I hold running backs because if there's any injuries that happen, I have an extra player that I could plug into the flex depending on what injuries happen during practice, and then I pick up a kicker on Sunday because generally, as I talk about in my videos, there's very little difference between the number 1 kicker and the number 20 kicker by the end of the season average. It's just a matter of predicting matchups, which is very arbitrary and hard to do. So it doesn't make sense for me personally to roster a bunch of a kicker continually or feel that you have to be compelled to hold a kicker at all times because it's very arbitrary and it's more effective long-term to hold players that could break out, aka Chuba Hubbard, than a kicker that is generally going to be anywhere from outlier week where he's number 1 to middle of the pack week where he doesn't stand out or really provide much value versus guys on waivers. So I would recommend doing this if I were you with your kickers. Question from Ryan H. Thank you for your support as well to the channel. Question of who to start sit among running backs, wide receivers. So running backs are David Montgomery, Alexander Mattison, Kenneth Gainwell, Nyheim Hines, Trey Sermon, Elijah Mitchell, and Tyson Williams. At running back, wide receivers, Antonio Brown, Robert Woods, Michael Pittman, and Hunter Renfrow. His quarterback is also Kyler Murray, as for context. So, coming from behind this week, so you play David Montgomery because he's got the most upside of your running back, so that's your RB1. Your RB2, if you're trying to play it safe, I would go Nyheim Hines. I think that is, well, first of all, if Cook is out, Mattison is that RB2, but it looks like Cook's going to play. So if you're trying to play it safe, go with Hines. I think that is the best option that you have in terms of having a safe value. But if you're trying to catch up from behind, you might need a little bit more than that. So potentially consider Trey Sermon if Elijah Mitchell is out. I would recommend starting Sermon because Seattle is a weak run defense, and if Mitchell is out, then Sermon has an opportunity to put up some good numbers. I just think there's a risk that it could be a boom or bust type game for him. But if you're trying to catch up from behind, you might as well shoot for the points. Receivers, so you're playing Antonio Brown, in my opinion. You're playing Michael Pittman. He's getting a lot of targets. It's going to eventually translate to more stats. Between Woods and Renfrow, I would play Woods because I think higher scoring game. Rams offense is going to eventually distribute the ball around, and Robert Woods will benefit. He started off slow, but a good buy low type player to have more positive regression of stats later on. Another thing to consider too, and I'm having a hard time figuring out who you would drop, I guess. I guess you would maybe consider dropping Renfrow to do this, but like if you have AJ Green or Christian Kirk on waivers, Ryan, what I would consider doing is, if you're really trying to catch up from behind, is maybe consider rostering them in place of Renfrow. Because if you stack AJ Green and Kyler Murray, and every touchdown AJ Green gets will be Kyler Murray stats as well. So that's a good way to potentially come back from behind. There's a lot of risk involved in that, though. So if AJ Green doesn't put up points, or if the whole Cardinals offense stalls against the Rams, it could backfire tremendously. But using the stack is a good way to get yourself back into it. So consider that as well if you're trying to come from behind and you have AJ Green, Christian Kirk, or even Rondale Moore available on waivers. You should definitely consider picking them up if needed. Questions from Fantasy Football Helper. So who to start among these receivers: Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Allen Robinson, or Henry Ruggs? So the order I rank them is Keenan Allen 1. I would say 2 is DJ Moore because of the matchup, but a very slightly ahead of DK Metcalf. Metcalf could have a lot of value if Lockett is out, but he's also got a tougher defensive matchup, in my opinion. 4 is Allen Robinson, but very much a dart throw that I wouldn't play. And then 5 is Henry Ruggs. In terms of another question from Fantasy Football Helper, which kicker to roster? Younghoe Koo or Nick Folk? And I would use Koo. He's going to have some opportunity against Washington, which is a more favorable defense as opposed to Nick Folk. Patriots offense looks out of sync, and I would personally try to go Koo in this matchup. And then a trade question as well. Would you trade Allen Robinson for A.J. Brown? And a very interesting trade of 2 buy low candidates. And I recommended that for him that he did make this trade because A.J. Brown is somebody that he could stash, because I believe you have Devontae Adams and another elite receiver as well. DK Metcalf, yeah. So that's where your decision is. DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen. So you have Allen Robinson. Sorry, I should have just inferred that from your earlier question. But you already have great receivers anyway, so you might as well try to take the chance on A.J. Brown if you can, because he could have... I think he's got more of a ceiling to have an upside play than Allen Robinson, just given the offense. Question from Jimmy Navarro. This was a trade question. Marquise Brown and Kareem Hunt for Jalen Waddle and Brandon Cooks. So he has Hunt looking for more receiver help. And for me personally, I would try to hold Hunt unless you get a great offer for him, I think somebody along the lines of a Thielen, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett type player or better. Because Hunt has incredible value if anything were to happen to Nick Chubb. Some of these receivers, so my recommendation for you is if you need receiver help, look for some of these guys like Hunter Renfrow. Braxton Berrios was that in the beginning, but not really anymore. But basically guys that you can have great floor value for. Tim Patrick, good example of that. Guys that are going to get receptions and involvement, but may not necessarily have high upside, but they're always very safe for you to rely upon. I think that's a better play than trying to trade away running back depth, because you don't want to be in a situation where you don't have running backs because people get injured and then you're having to pick up guys off waivers. That's not a situation that you want to end up in. So try to hold Hunt if you can, unless you can get a great receiver value for him. Question from Jack Armstrong, another trade. This is James Robinson and Marquise Brown for Mike Williams. And I think that's kind of to me, I would not do that for Mike Williams because basically there's going to be a couple questions like this. But anytime you're on a trade where you're giving up a receiver or you're getting a receiver, but you're giving up a receiver and a running back, I generally do not like those trades because the running back depth is essential, especially with injuries. So, and to me, look, receivers, there's some elite receivers, Hopkins, Hill, Adams, Metcalf, potentially Diggs, guys like that those guys are stand out and give you some excellent value. But receivers are very much matchup dependent and can vary a lot. Running backs, you can generally expect good things from them when they get into certain matchups, and it's better to have that depth. To me, it's better to have a few receivers that you can rely upon than having a lot of receivers and not a lot of running backs, because then it becomes a constant start-sit decision with different receivers that are good, and if injuries happen, then you're running out of options at your running back. So I would hold on any trades where you're giving up a running back and a receiver for exchange for a receiver because you're ultimately changing your running back depth. Question from NHBuckets again. Trade of Mike Williams for Calvin Ridley. So that would be something I would do. I think Calvin, as I mentioned earlier, I think Calvin Ridley is a good guy to exchange for Mike Williams because of the target share that he's getting. Question from My Topics and Opinions, Joe. His question is who to start and sit. Austin Ekeler, Chris Carson, Mike Davis, Cordero Patterson, and Trey Sermon are the running backs. Emmanuel Sanders, Julio Jones, Mike Williams, Marvin Jones, Godwin, and then Patterson, because he has that running back wide receiver designation, are the decisions. So what I would do, Ekeler, Carson, yes, I'd play them. Mike Williams, I would play. That's your best receiver that's still available to you, assuming that you didn't play Marvin Jones this week. I think Williams is better than Jones anyway, but Julio Jones, it doesn't really look like he's going to play, and I'm not sure what his involvement will be anyway going up against the Jets. So I would leave Julio out for this week. And what I would recommend doing is, Patterson. So you could plug Patterson in as your other receiving option. I think that's solid. I think Godwin is a little bit safer to me than Sanders. So if Julio Jones is out, then I would probably go Godwin. And I think I would probably go Godwin even if Julio plays, because if he's nursing an injury going up against a bad team, he probably isn't going to get a lot of receptions. So basically, RB1, Ekeler, RB2, Carson, wide receiver 1, Williams, wide receiver 2, Godwin, and then flex Patterson. Question from Aiden. So Cooper Kupp for Robert Woods and Calvin Ridley. That is a very tough question. And I kind of lean towards Kupp because Kupp is one of the best receivers so far this year, but it's it all depends on how Robert Woods' role is going to develop. I think Robert Woods could have a bigger role, but just the way Matt Stafford operates with Cooper Kupp and the chemistry they have so far, I would personally rather have Kupp than the combination of Woods and Ridley. But I think that's a very interesting trade that I would definitely consider making in one side or the other, depending on what other players I have rostered. Thank you for those of you who commented. I will spend last little bit of this video talking about some other start-sit questions as well for food for thought going into this week. So half PPR, Chuba Hubbard or Amari Cooper. I would play Chuba Hubbard. I think he's a safer pick than Amari Cooper. Cooper has a good matchup potentially, but I think Chuba Hubbard is going to have a lot of volume, and they're going to be coming from behind, so they're probably going to be passing it to him quite a bit as well. Start-sit question. So a couple players here. Saquon Barkley, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift is the running backs. Receivers are Terry McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, Brandon Cooks, and I believe Chase. So assuming Chase you didn't play, what I would do is sit Saquon Barkley, and I would play Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, and then the receivers, I would go Terry McLaurin and Ridley and Cooks. Cooks, I think, is very undervalued because the target share that he gets on the Texans is just immense, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon unless they either trade Cooks away or require somebody else. So I think Saquon is a tough matchup against New Orleans, and I like Najee and Harris and DeAndre Swift over them, so I would probably sit Saquon in that situation. Unless you're in a standard, then I would probably bench Cooks for Saquon, but that's what I would do in PPR formats. Pick 2 among these players. So, Antonio Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Jacoby Meyers, and Corey Davis. So, the 2 that I would take are Antonio Brown and Jacoby Meyers. This is a full PPR league, by the way. Jacoby Meyers in full PPR, he's going to get a lot of receptions. He's been the most consistent target for New England. Antonio Brown has potential for being up and down, but I do think that he has some high-level potential because I think that the Stephon Gilmore Patriots are key defensive players are going to be focusing in on Mike Evans, and that will free up opportunities for AB and Godwin. That's just my projection. Ayuk is still too inconsistent for me, and Corey Davis, I just think the offense limits a lot of his upside, and we don't know for sure if he's even going to be the guy consistently getting targets because week 2 he was relatively a flop in that category. Woods or Claypool. So I would personally go, if you're in a standard league, I would go Woods because I think he has a higher potential for touchdowns. But in a PPR league, I would go Claypool because I think he has a higher potential for more receptions. And I say this because the explosiveness of the Rams offense will give those guys consistent ability to score touchdowns. But Green Bay's defense is, I think, better than people give it credit for, and Pittsburgh may struggle to get in the end zone against them. Interesting question from the same game. Michael Pittman or Myles Gaskin? I would go Michael Pittman personally because number 1 receiver gets a lot of targets. Myles Gaskin is still splitting with Malcolm Brown among other guys, and I'm not entirely sure how effective Miami will be against the Colts on offense. So I would go Michael Pittman as the guy that's got more of the focal point of his own offense. So yeah. Then another question. So who to start among Corey Davis, Emmanuel Sanders, Tim Patrick, or Kyle Pitts at the flex? I would go Tim Patrick. I think that's the safest play. The other guys either have offensive questions or role questions in terms of how involved they will be. So I would personally go Tim Patrick, especially given all the injuries on the Broncos. Another Mike Williams trade question. So would you trade Mike Williams for Tyler Lockett and DeAndre Hopkins? And that's a definite yes. I can't believe whoever is offering that, willing to accept that offer, who proposed giving away those 2 for Mike Williams, but that is a huge haul if you can pull that off. That is a Mike Williams trade you do want to do. Deebo Samuel or Amari Cooper? I would go Amari Cooper. I don't generally like Cooper, but I think that he's going to be I like his potential for putting up a good game more than Deebo Samuel personally. I think the 49ers offense, their roles are still very concerned to me. Would you trade Brandon Cooks for Antonio Brown? And no, because Cooks has, again, the huge target share. Antonio Brown, he's in an explosive offense, but if he's not getting nearly the target share of Brandon Cooks, and that limits his opportunities for yardage and also increases opportunities for more bust games. Who to start? So Saquon Barkley, Chuba Hubbard, or Miles Sanders? Interesting question. And I would actually put Hubbard 1. Again, shows the values of these guys that are handcuffs because he's got the best matchup of these players, in my opinion, and he's also got the best workload scenario compared to guys like Sanders, who's still splitting with Kenneth Gainwell. Their offense did not involve the run for whatever reason last week. I like Hubbard, then I like Saquon, and then I like Miles Sanders. All right, another question. Chris Godwin, Hollywood Brown, or Cortland Sutton? It's Marquise Brown. I mixed up different players. So I would go Marquise Brown here. Then I would go Cortland Sutton, and then I would go Godwin because of the target share. Godwin, I think, is safe, but I do think that Sutton and Brown will get more involvement, and then Brown, I like the matchup more. Noah Fant or Evan Ingram? I would go Evan Ingram again because, well, one, matchup, and then two, the Giants had injuries to Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard next week. It's probably going to be a lot of Ingram and Galladay. I like Evan Ingram to potentially take advantage of that. Who to start in the flex? Elijah Mitchell, Juju Smith-Schuster, Will Fuller, or Jamison Crowder? First of all, I'm not high on Crowder at all. I don't think anybody should be playing him. Will Fuller, I'm also not playing because he wasn't really super involved against Las Vegas last week, and Colts, I think, are a better defense. I would go Juju Smith-Schuster. I think there's a chance Elijah Mitchell plays, but I'm still very cautious about that backfield. I would go Juju if he is healthy and available. And then I guess if you had both those guys out, I would go Will Fuller next. Rondale Moore, Tyson Williams, or Trey Sermon in half PPR. That's another very difficult decision of guys that I don't really like this week. But I think you have to go Rondale Moore because it's a PPR format, and I expect it to be a high-scoring game where he will get involvement. Just understand there's potential for bust there. Zach Moss or Chuba Hubbard? Two players with great matchups. I like Hubbard, though, because it's going to be a game that's more competitive, and they're going to involve Hubbard more. Bills could get very far ahead, and they could split between Moss, Singletary, and Matt Breida even. So, and then another scenario potentially is, what if the Bills get up huge because of Josh Allen touchdowns, and then they don't, or passing touchdowns or even rushing touchdowns, they don't need Zach Moss to really run the ball at all, so they decide that, oh, now we're up 35-0, let's rest our key players, and then you got nothing out of them. I think that is a likely scenario to consider as well. This question is Nelson Aguilar or Chase Edmonds. And I would definitely go Edmonds in this situation. This is a PPR league too. Edmonds, I think, will get a lot of opportunity against the Rams that I think has potential for a 10-target, high-level reception game because they're going to be having a difficult time running against that front of Aaron Donald. I like Chase. Quarterback question. 2-quarterback league. They've got Josh Allen, Ryan Tannehill, or Teddy Bridgewater. I would go Josh Allen first, number one. That's not too much of a question. The next I would go is Bridgewater over Tannehill. And I say this because Bridgewater, so Tannehill's got a great matchup, but he's also down his best two receivers, potentially might not play. They will also likely blow out the Jets, and he may not need to throw. Bridgewater's got a tough matchup, but I do think they will need to throw quite often to stay in the game, and I think Bridgewater has a better chance for points. Even though Tannehill does have the opportunity to go off, I think more than likely that may not happen. Receiver question. Robert Woods, Cole Beasley, or Antonio Brown? I would take Cole Beasley number one because PPR leagues, Cole Beasley is heavily involved, and I think even if it's in a standard league, compared to those guys, Cole Beasley has a great role in the offense and is going to get a lot of yardage. AB and Woods, I think, could go off, but you're depending highly on the production of other players and where their quarterback goes. I would go Cole Beasley. Another Chuba Hubbard question. Chuba Hubbard or Devontae Smith? Smith has a tempting matchup against Kansas City, but Smith is also, as I predicted at the beginning of the season, very up and down game to game. He had a good week 1, relatively poor 2 and 3. So he's got a good matchup against Kansas City, but he might not take advantage of that as much as we think. I would play Hubbard to be safe. And then my last question is Corey Davis or Cordero Patterson. I would go Cordero Patterson here because of the offensive capabilities. Corey Davis, I'm very concerned about his longevity. I know he's getting targets, but he's not getting the consistent, overwhelming targets like a Brandon Cooks would be. So I would go Cordero Patterson in a better matchup. That's all I got for this video, though. If you're interested in more content like this, please consider commenting, or subscribing to my channel. I make fantasy football videos on Mondays to recap the previous day's games. Tuesday is my big start-sit video where I look at start-sits, or excuse me, not start-sits. Buy low, sell high. So I talk about players to trade. I also talk about waivers to pick up people, and then who to drop from roster as well. The start-sit video is on Saturdays, and then I make some content in between from time to time as well, depending on what's going on in the news. But if you got any questions last minute, comment in this video, and I will try to get to you as soon as I can if you have any questions leading up to Sunday. But yeah, best of luck this week, and if you need anything for any other assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. So, all right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.